What happens when the most powerful navy on Earth decides to systematically destroy a fortress that took 50 years to build? Let me show you exactly what unfolded in the Persian Gulf, because what the United States military accomplished in just 90 minutes will reshape naval warfare forever. Before we dive in, if you're someone who craves in-depth military analysis delivered with precision and honesty, then hit that subscribe button right now and join our community of strategic thinkers. I promise you won't regret it. The Strait of Hormuz is barely 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. That tiny ribbon of water separates Iran from Oman and sits like a choke point between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Every single day, approximately 20 to 25% of the world's seaborne oil trade flows through this stretch of ocean. Tankers carrying crude from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, and the UAE all must pass through here to reach international markets. Japan depends on this region for roughly 90% of its crude oil. South Korea, India, and China are all deeply interconnected with this waterway. For over 5 decades, Iran has understood this simple geographical reality better than anyone else on the planet. They realized that controlling even a small sliver of this strait meant controlling a lever that could shake global energy markets and hold the world economy hostage. That brings us to 3 small rocky islands sitting directly at the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz: Greater Tunb, Lesser Tunb, and Abu Musa. Their combined land area is less than 25 square kilometers. You could fit all 3 islands inside a modest American city and still have room for parks and parking lots. But their location is worth more than any piece of geography on Earth. Greater Tunb sits approximately 30 miles south of the Iranian mainland and about 50 miles northwest of the United Arab Emirates. It sits directly on the inbound shipping lane that fully loaded supertankers use when entering the Persian Gulf. Any radar installation on Greater Tunb can track every vessel attempting to transit the deep water channel. Any missile battery positioned there covers vessels both entering and exiting the Gulf. These islands were not always Iranian. On November 30th, 1971, just 2 days before the United Arab Emirates formally established itself as a nation, the Iranian Imperial Navy seized all 3 islands by military force. 6 Ras al-Kha police officers attempted to defend Lesser Tunb against 2,000 Iranian soldiers. 4 people were killed. The islands were taken. 2 days later, the UAE was born, and one of its first acts as a new nation was to protest the loss of territory it would never recover. For over 50 years, the UAE has maintained its sovereignty claim at Gulf Cooperation Council summits and Arab League meetings. Iran rejected every diplomatic protest and then did something far more consequential than winning an argument. They built. By the mid-1990s, document after document from defense researchers confirmed that Iranian forces on Abu Musa operated American-made Hawk anti-aircraft batteries alongside Chinese-built Silkworm anti-ship missiles. By March 2025, Iranian military officials publicly announced that new missile systems on all 3 islands could reach targets up to 600 kilometers away. 600 kilometers. That is the entire width of the Persian Gulf covered from islands Iran seized over 50 years ago. Iranian officials themselves describe these islands as stationary and unsinkable aircraft carriers. Chinese military researchers at Sun Yat-sen University published academic papers analyzing them as the arch of Iran's coastal defense. 7 islands, forming an interlocking network designed to make the Strait of Hormuz impossible for any adversary to control without Iranian permission. These islands were the foundation of everything the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy built in this region. Every tanker that got swarmed, every container ship crew forced to abandon vessel, every cruise missile launched at a transiting ship, all of it planned, staged, and supported from these islands. They were the operational backbone of Iran's ability to threaten the world's most important waterway. But here is what the mainstream coverage completely missed. The missile systems and radar installations on those islands, as dangerous as they were not the real threat. The true weapon that made the Strait of Hormuz a nightmare for commercial shipping was something far simpler and far more difficult to counter. It was the Mosquito fleet. The Congressional Research Service, the nonpartisan research arm of the United States Congress, documented Iran's Mosquito fleet as comprising thousands of small high-speed boats capable of racing at 40 to 60 knots. These boats came armed with machine guns, rockets, anti-ship missiles, and in some cases, mine-laying equipment. Individually, such boats are not a match for a United States Navy destroyer. They are highly unlikely to sink a massive tanker outright, but that completely misses the entire point of what they were designed to do. The IRGC's naval doctrine, refined over 4 decades and tested extensively during the 1980s Iran-Iraq tanker war, is built around asymmetric maritime guerrilla warfare. The goal is not to defeat the U.S. Navy in conventional combat. The goal is to make the Strait of Hormuz feel like walking through a war zone for every commercial ship captain. Iran does not need to sink a tanker. It just needs tanker captains to believe there is a real chance their ship gets swarmed, their crew boarded, their vessel disabled by a mine. If insurance rates spike high enough, and they did multiple times, ships stay in port. The strait closes without Iran winning a single direct military engagement. That is the genius and the menace of the Mosquito fleet strategy. The IRGC understood that economic pressure and perceived risk could accomplish what military force could not. Their fast attack boats operate at 50 to 70 knots and launch from multiple directions simultaneously. Researchers documented dispersed swarming tactics where 20 or more boats converge on a target from different vectors, overwhelming any single defensive response. These boats have minimal radar signatures, hide in sea caves along Iran's southern coastline, can launch, attack, and retreat before a warship fully processes the threat. The IRGC commissioned 110 new combat speedboats in December 2021, and then ordered 112 more in a follow-on delivery. Their commanders told Iranian state media that speeds had climbed from 55 knots to 75 and 90 knots, with next-generation boats reaching 110 knots. These are not outdated remnants. These are constantly upgraded weapons built specifically for this environment. CNN, citing U.S. intelligence assessments, reported that Iran still retained approximately 50% of its pre-war Mosquito fleet, despite 6 weeks of intense strikes. Trump initially dismissed the smaller fast attack craft as not being a significant threat. But defense experts quoted in major publications now identify those same vessels as the central problem. They are capable of choking the world's most strategic waterway without formally closing it, which is actually more effective than a declared blockade because it is harder to respond to and harder to reverse. Now let me walk you through exactly what the United States military did about all of this, because the operational details reveal a level of strategic sophistication that most coverage has completely overlooked. If you're finding this breakdown valuable, take a moment to like this video. It helps more people discover serious military analysis in a landscape full of shallow takes. On July 13th, U.S. Central Command confirmed a 5-hour mission, striking military targets across an extensive list of locations, including Bushehr, Chabahar, Jask, Keshem, Abu Musa, and Bandar Abbas. 5 hours of continuous precision strikes across the entire southern Iranian coastline and the island network simultaneously. The strike packages targeted Iranian coastal defense systems, missile and drone sites, and maritime capabilities with precision munitions. The radar stations watching the strait went dark. The missile systems that Iranian commanders boasted could cover 600 kilometers of ocean were eliminated. The drone sites that the IRGC used to identify, track, and vector its Mosquito boats onto target vessels were struck. The surveillance infrastructure that gave Iran eyes across the entire waterway was degraded. Then came July 15th, and this is where the operation became genuinely remarkable. Central Command conducted 3 distinct waves of strikes against Iranian targets in a single day. Global security analysts describe this tempo as without precedent in the current campaign cycle. The first wave began at exactly 600 Eastern Time and ran for 90 uninterrupted minutes. The official statement was specific and unambiguous. Precision munitions struck coastal defense systems, missile storage facilities, and launch sites on Greater Tunb Island. That single island, Iran's most important maritime fortress at the mouth of the strait, received a full 90-minute dedicated strike package targeting both its defensive infrastructure and its cruise missile capabilities simultaneously. Coastal defense installations eliminated, cruise missile storage destroyed, launch sites rendered inoperable. 9 hours later, a second wave struck additional targets, and then at 2100 Eastern, a third round targeted Iranian command centers, air defense sites, missile and drone capabilities, and critically, coastal surveillance facilities. That last target category deserves special emphasis because it is strategically pivotal. The IRGC's ability to see what is happening in the strait, their integrated radar networks and sensor systems, their capacity to track vessel movements, identify targets, and coordinate their Mosquito boat swarms depends entirely on functioning coastal surveillance. You cannot vector a swarm of 20 speedboats onto a supertanker if you cannot see the supertanker. The July 15th third wave was specifically designed to blind the IRGC operationally. Hit the eyes, hit the command centers, hit the launchers, all in one day. July 15th also produced a first that deserves serious attention. It was the first time in the entire campaign that the United States conducted daylight strikes against Iran. Every previous strike had been either at night or during dusk. July 15th began at 0600 in the morning in broad daylight. That is not an accident. That is a deliberate signal. We are not hiding. We are not being cautious. We are coming in daylight and we are hitting your most strategically important positions, and you cannot stop us. But the most historically significant development of this entire campaign did not happen on Greater Tunb. It happened 3 days earlier at Bandar Abbas. On July 12, 2026, at Iran's most important naval installation, sitting directly on the coast of the Strait of Hormuz, the United States military did something it had never done before in its entire history. 3 Saronic Corsair unmanned surface vessels, autonomous sea drones, robot boats, navigated into Bandar Abbas naval base and struck a submarine and ship maintenance facility. Central Command confirmed the operation the following day, posting 25 seconds of footage shot from inside one of the Corsair drones during its terminal approach. The footage shows exactly what the weapon saw: a yellow maintenance gantry, a Goddard-class Iranian submarine hanging in a sling beneath it, completely out of the water undergoing repairs. The camera continues closing in, the image grows larger, and then the screen goes dark. The footage raised a question that the Pentagon has not publicly addressed. It is not known whether a human operator authorized the terminal attack approach, or whether the autonomous AI system of the Corsair made that targeting decision on its own. Did an American autonomous machine decide to strike a military target in combat without a human pulling the trigger? That question is one of the most consequential unanswered questions in modern military ethics, and it happened on July 12, 2026, in a real combat operation against a real target. Let me give you the Corsair's specifications because they matter enormously. Saronic Technologies, based in Austin, Texas, unveiled the system in October 2024. In December 2025, the U.S. Navy awarded Saronic a $392 million production contract. Prototype to full production in under 1 year. At least 300 units built as of May 2026. Range of 1,000 nautical miles. Payload capacity of 1,000 pounds. It operates at water level with a minimal radar cross-section. No crew, no support ship required. It navigates and strikes autonomously. 3 Corsairs were used in the Bandar Abbas strike, with all 3 confirmed hitting the port facility. This redundancy ensures that even if 1 or 2 were intercepted, the target would still be eliminated. The Ghadir-class submarine struck was a diesel-electric vessel. Iran's Ghadir fleet was estimated before this conflict at between 16 and 20 submarines total. The submarine in the footage was sitting out of the water in a maintenance facility, completely vulnerable, meaning it had been pulled out of service for repair. It will not be returning to operational status. The strategic implication of the Corsair's combat debut extends far beyond Iran. China watched this. Russia watched this. North Korea watched this. Every adversary that maintains naval bases on coastlines or in harbors just learned that American autonomous sea drones can reach those facilities with no American crew at risk. This can happen at ranges exceeding 1,000 nautical miles, in numbers large enough to guarantee target destruction even against defended installations. There is another element of the current U.S. military response that has not received the attention it deserves. As a former combat aviator, I find this genuinely remarkable from a doctrine and employment standpoint. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff stated publicly that the battlefield in this conflict is shifting closer to the water's surface. Pentagon sources reported that A-10 Thunderbolt II aircraft have been deployed specifically to engage Iranian fast attack craft in the Strait of Hormuz theater. AH-64. Apache gunships are being used to intercept drones and monitor maritime activity across the Persian Gulf. Think about what that actually means. The A-10 Warthog is a Cold War ground attack aircraft designed around survivability at low altitude, extreme durability, and devastating firepower. The entire airframe is built around the GAU-8 Avenger cannon, a 30mm rotary weapon that fires 3,900 rounds per minute. The A-10 is essentially a gun that happens to have an airplane attached to it. In this context, it is being deployed over the Strait of Hormuz to provide low-altitude, persistent, close-range lethality against exactly the kind of small, fast, dispersed targets that the IRGC Mosquito fleet represents. At wavetop altitude, an A-10 can see and engage speedboats that would be invisible to a high-flying strike aircraft. At that altitude, the pilot can visually distinguish a civilian fishing boat from an IRGC fast attack craft, dramatically reducing civilian risk. With the Warthog's famously durable design, titanium cockpit bathtub, and redundant flight systems, the aircraft can remain in the threat environment far longer than a more fragile platform. The Apache helicopters fill the adjacent role, carrying Hellfire missiles with 8-kilometer range. They are detecting and engaging small maritime targets with their advanced sensor suite. A-10s for persistent low-altitude firepower, Apaches for precision anti-boat engagement. A coverage layer the IRGC Mosquito fleet has never faced before in this conflict. On July 15th, while strikes were hitting coastal facilities, Central Command did something else that deserves its own attention. They fired Hellfire missiles into the smokestack of a crude oil tanker called the Belma. The United States had reimposed its naval blockade of Iranian ports on July 14th, barring ships from transiting the Strait of Hormuz to access Iranian ports. The Belma was an unladen oil tanker heading to pick up cargo at Karg Island, Iran's main oil export terminal. It received multiple warnings from U.S. forces. It ignored them. Central Command fired Hellfire missiles into its smokestack. The ship was disabled and is no longer sailing. This is the first time since the blockade was reimposed that the U.S. has physically enforced it by firing on a vessel. The hellfire into the smokestack is a deliberate precision choice designed to disable the ship's propulsion without sinking it and without killing the crew. The message to every other tanker captain in the region is unambiguous. The blockade is real. The enforcement is real. The U.S. military will shoot your ship's engines out from the air if you try to run it. That message was received instantly across the commercial shipping industry. Transit numbers through the strait dropped further on that day, consistent with the depressed levels seen since hostilities resumed. Here is the hard truth that everyone watching this situation needs to understand. You cannot completely solve the Mosquito fleet problem from the air alone. The IRGC's fast attack boats hide in sea caves and among the thousands of islands, inlets, and coral reefs along Iran's southern coastline. The same complex geography that protected Iranian small boat operations during the 1980s tanker war makes them extremely difficult to target from the air. You cannot bomb a sea cave in advance because you do not know which caves contain boats until they launch. And once 20 speedboats converge on a tanker from multiple vectors at 90 knots, the window to stop them before they reach the vessel is extremely tight. The strikes are working, but degrading is not eliminating. The IRGC built this fleet specifically to be distributed, hidden, and survivable. They have thousands of boats, decades of operational experience, and tactics refined through the tanker war and countless confrontations with the U.S. Navy. Their naval chief publicly stated they are waiting in the Gulf with boats and drones ready to destroy American ships. This is exactly why the combination of tactics the U.S. is employing matters so much. Airstrikes on the islands remove the forward staging platforms and radar coverage. Sea drones hit the maintenance facilities and submarine assets at Bandar Abbas. A-10 Warthogs and Apache gunships hunt the boats themselves at low altitude. The naval blockade, enforced by Hellfire missiles into tanker smokestacks, changes the economic calculation for any commercial operator considering running cargo to Iran. GPS spoofing continues to throw vessel position reports off by dozens of miles, adding operational chaos on top of direct military threat. The United States is running an integrated multi-domain campaign against a distributed, adaptive adversary that has been preparing for exactly this fight for 40 years. The islands struck on July 15th were not just military targets. They were the eyes, the launchers, and the forward command nodes. And without the island surveillance systems watching the strait, the IRGC cannot see tankers well enough to vector boats onto them. Without the island missile systems, the threat envelope that keeps shipping companies from transiting shrinks dramatically. Without the maintenance facilities at Bandar Abbas, the submarines that provide a deeper water threat cannot be serviced. What the U.S. campaign against Iran's coastal infrastructure aims to create is a condition where Iran's physical ability to threaten shipping is degraded enough that insurers assess the strait as navigable again. Whether destroying the island network, the submarine assets, the surveillance systems, and the missile sites achieves that threshold is what the next phase will determine. Before I close, I want to ask you something directly in the comments below. What do you think happens next? Does the U.S. eventually have to send forces into those sea caves to eliminate the Mosquito fleet problem permanently? Is the Corsair Sea drone the game changer that ends IRGC submarine capability in the Persian Gulf? Or is this campaign ultimately a holding action while both sides look for a diplomatic off-ramp? I read every single comment, and I want to know your assessment. Here's where we stand. Iran spent 50 years transforming 3 rocky islands at the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz into layered military fortresses. They called these islands their stationary and unsinkable aircraft carriers, the physical foundation of everything the IRGC built to threaten global shipping. On July 15, 2026, the U.S. military hit those islands 3 times in one day. Greater Tunb's coastal defense systems and cruise missile launch sites were struck. Command centers, air defense sites, surveillance systems, and missile capabilities across the island network at Iranian mainland were targeted in subsequent waves. 3 days earlier, 3 Saronic Corsair Sea drones navigated into Bandar Abbas with no crew aboard and destroyed a Ghadir-class submarine, the first autonomous maritime combat strike in American history. A-10 Warthogs and Apache helicopters are now hunting Mosquito fleet speedboats at low altitude. The naval blockade, enforced by Hellfire missiles into a tanker smokestack, is reimposed and operational. All of this while approximately 20% of the world's seaborne oil trade sits effectively offline. Tanker transit through the strait has dropped from 110 ships per day to a fraction of that number, and the escalation ladder continues to be climbed. Stay locked on this situation. The next development could come at any moment. When it does, I will break it down here with the same level of detail and professional analysis you just received.